partners and allies to us and have helped us at every step along the way. So I cannot thank them enough again for welcoming us into their home and letting us use their space. I also want to thank the GMU NAACP for being partners in this event as well. And I also want to thank the Fairfax County Federation of Teachers, who are also always partners to us. Always, FT is always there for us when we need them. So thank you so much again. We've done a lot of candidate forums over the years. This is one of our first that's being led by our young adult committee. Marlon put this together, so I want to thank Marlon personally for all the one of the voices we need to amplify the most is not only people of color, but of young people who are going to face many of the issues we see both at the school level and the criminal justice system, environmentally. So this is part of our ongoing effort to do that. But thank you all for coming here today, and I'll turn it over so you can hear the rules of the forum and how this will be moderated. After the at-large school board session, we will have a conversation with one of the candidates for Commonwealth Attorney. Thank you so much.
So as Sean said, my name is Marlon DeBuson. I'm the Young Adult Committee Chairman for Fairfax County NAACP. I was born and raised in Northern Virginia, and I'm a product of Fairfax County school system. I went to South County High School. So after South County, I attended Christopher Newport University and majored in business administration. Following that, I attended George Mason University and completed my master's in public policy. And I still reside in Northern Virginia in the Mount Vernon district. To my right is Dominique Dowling. She's originally from Richmond, Virginia, and is a sophomore at George Mason University, majoring in integrative studies with a concentration in liberal arts for teaching profession. She's a member of the NAACP. She's been a member of the NAACP for a year and currently serves as the chapter's president. Now I'll pass the mic to Tina Williams, who is the president of the Fairfax County Federation of Teachers.
Thank you so much for coming out this morning. It is a pleasure to be on this panel. I love the diversity of this, the candidates that we have today. So thank you all for stepping up. I'm Tina Williams, president of Fairfax County Federation of Teachers Union. We represent over 4,000 educators across this wonderful county. Our members are all non-administrative, certified, and classified employees, which include teachers, instructional assistants, school psychologists, social workers and counselors, clerical and support staff, as well as other staff who make our schools succeed. We are a union of professionals that champion fairness, democracy, economic opportunity, and high-quality public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and this community. We're committed to advancing these principles through community engagement, organizing, collective bargaining, and political activism, and through the work that our members do. We fight for quality public education for students, educators, and our community. The questions that I will be asking this morning represent the top priorities of our members, and we look forward for the dialogue today, and we hope that the election will result in Fairfax County electing pro-public education and pro-worker candidates. Thank you.
Great, now I'll introduce the candidates. From the far side, we have Darren Keys-Gamara. Next, we have Cheryl Buford, Priscilla DeStefano, Rosna Sizemore-Heismer, Arbara Omash, and then Vision Palathongal. Okay, go ahead. My last name is DeBuson, so everyone butchers my last name, so I want to try to get it right at least. So to go over some of the rules, there will be a timekeeper right up front. Bradley, put your hand up. Okay. So when the candidate has 20 seconds left, Brad will signal with his hand 20 seconds. When the candidate does not have any time left, he'll put up the red book. Education, get it? Okay. So candidates will have a minute for introductions, a minute for responses, and then closing will give you 2 minutes. If a candidate chooses not to follow the rules of the time, interacts in uncivil discourse, we have the right to remove microphone privileges for that question, and if necessary, hopefully not, the following questions. As you know, literature was allowed on the tables and yard signs were allowed inside but not outside. And the NAACP, we are a nonpartisan organization. And as these candidates know, since they all run as independents, they are as well nonpartisan. We care about the issues, not the parties. And I think that's what really is the best thing about this forum in general. We can really dive into the issues at hand. So for the questions, we'll start with Karen for question number 1. Question number 2 will be Cheryl, and we'll go down that way. Excuse me. Question number 1, we'll start with Karen, and all the candidates will have a chance to answer the questions. And after that, question number 2, we'll start with Cheryl, but we'll end with Karen, and we'll keep going in that order. So now we can kick it off with introductions, and Karen, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Karen Keys-Gamara, and I am currently serving. It is my privilege to serve as one of your at-large school board members since 2017. As some of you may know, I'm a mother of 3 boys, all of whom have graduated from Fairfax County Public Schools. One of my sons just graduated from West Point, and yes, I dropped my youngest off at William and Mary. Don't think I need therapy, but I am recovering from that. I also work as an attorney representing children in difficult situations like abuse and neglect all the way through to adoption, and I've been very involved in my community. I took that experience to the board as well as my interaction with constituents and got right to work. I've been working on things like making sure we have greater access to advanced academics, which teaches critical thinking skills, improving our special education experience, and revising our discipline code so that we focus more on restorative justice and less in keeping kids in the classroom. So I just really thank you for this opportunity today. I'm grateful to First Baptist Church of Vienna and to the NAACP and the FCFT, and look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm especially glad that this event is at First Baptist. My own church has long-standing relationships with this church, with Dr. Walton and recently retired Pastor Watkins. And I thoroughly enjoyed spending Juneteenth here. You all made me feel so welcome, and I really appreciate it. My experience with Fairfax County Public Schools started nearly 20 years ago when my children were very little. They're now grown and graduated, but my work is not finished. I have an extensive background as a former teacher. I worked at the Department of Education on policies and programs to help at-risk youth. I have been a 30-year consultant to nonprofit organizations. I am also the granddaughter of Eastern European immigrants. I know in a very personal way that education can change a family's life. I will always remember that I work for you, the students, parents, teachers, administrators, taxpayers, and broader Fairfax County community. My name is Cheryl Buford. I ask for your vote on November 5th.
Hello everyone, my name is Priscilla DeStefano. I am a proud first-generation American. Both my parents are from El Salvador, but I was raised in Fairfax County, so I too am a native here. I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, who are both here. They both sacrificed everything for my siblings and I to be raised in Fairfax County. So I was in K through 12 in Fairfax County. My senior year, I became pregnant with my first son. But I was able to transfer to Mountain View Alternative School. I attended Northern Virginia Community College, received my associate's, transferred to George Mason, received my bachelor's degree. Fast forward a few years later, my husband and I now live in Fairfax, 2 miles away. And we're raising our second son, who's 3, in the special needs program in Fairfax County. So both of my kids are enrolled. I am fighting to represent parents, to bring them a voice on the school board, because right now only 2 out of the 12 school board members actually have children enrolled in Fairfax County. And I think that we need more representation. I think we need more members who are going to not just make decisions that impact us every day, but bring us to the table, bring us in, engage. And I promise, if elected on November 5th, I will do that for you. I will be your voice and I will represent you. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachna Sizemore-Heiser, and I too am a parent of a child currently in our schools. My son is in high school. My daughter, who's sitting right here, graduated 2 years ago, and they spent their entire educational careers in Fairfax County. And I, along with them, have spent 12 years as a parent advocate working for change for all students in all parts of our county. So I know our school system inside and out and bring a level of institutional knowledge regarding our schools. I also bring a gamut of skills and experience to the school board. I am an attorney. I am a product of public school myself, from kindergarten all the way through college and law school at Berkeley. I also am a former management consultant. So when you look at a $3 billion budget, I have skills and knowledge of how to manage a $3 billion budget. And as a college professor, formerly at George Mason, I know the skills your children need to be successful in college and beyond. And here's my hint to you. It's not teaching to the test. It's critical thinking and reasoning, and I want to bring more of those back to our schools. I also am endorsed by the teachers' unions and do a lot of work on disability justice and juvenile justice work. I've even partnered with the NAACP on discussions around intersectionality of race and disability in the criminal justice system. So one of the things that I want to bring to the school board is a voice for those students who need it, an understanding of how to support students who don't always have that voice. My name is Rachna Sizemore-Heiser. I hope you'll vote for me on November 5th. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. How are we all doing? Good. It's early, but I'm Abrar Omesh. I'm running for school board. Obviously, I'm excited with the NAACP this morning, especially a group that I consider my people, and a group that cares about issues that matter to me. You know, when I grew up in this community, I went through our schools. I had spent 12 years in our buildings, and then have been doing this work for 10 years. And I will tell you, the issue that motivated me to run is the fact that the American dream is not alive for so many people, and that there are barriers, systemic injustices, and institutional issues and challenges that we're seeing that lead to a situation where a student who works hard may not actually have a chance to succeed. And we see that in so many cases. I saw that when I was a student on a personal level with my own peers who would flunk out of a class because they couldn't afford tutoring. So in response to that, I started an organization that's been providing tutoring and mentorship to kids in 20 locations over the past 10 years. We've been serving thousands of families, and I've since served on various school board committees and currently chair the HR committee. Along with Tina Williams, we've been attending meetings working on that. I want to be accessible to everyone. I know what it was like growing up with leadership who I didn't feel represented me or understood my values or what I needed. And too often we see that so many communities are unheard. So Abrar Omesh, I hope I can get your vote and look forward to the conversation we're going to have this morning.
Hello everyone. I am Vincent Xavier Paladikal, an immigrant from India, a Fairfax resident for the last 21 years. An engineer with a bachelor's from India and a master's from US, worked for Maryland State Highway Administration, Metro Washington Council of Governments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and now currently running an IT business in Tyson's Corner. I come from a lower middle class family in India. I had a conservative Christian upbringing that helped shape my worldview. We have 2 kids who graduated from FCPS with outstanding honors. I was very active FCPS parent during their times, have run hands-on science programs, guided multiple science Olympiad teams. In parts of Fairfax County, we have some of the worst achievement numbers that you can think of in the nation. This is simply not acceptable. Busing and or school name changes are not going to fix this. The school board has no clue how achievement happens, and they are not ready to listen. I have learned how achievement happens from my experience as a poor immigrant, an involved parent, and a problem solver businessman. makes me distinctly qualified for this job. A vote for me on November 5th is a vote for real change, and I seek your support. Thank you.
Thank you to all our candidates. So let's give them one more hand. So now we'll start with the questions. Karen, you'll begin. You'll have 1 minute, and then it will go to Cheryl, and we'll keep passing the mic down from there. Because each candidate has 1 minute, and there are 6 of you. I'm not great at math, but that's 6 minutes. So let's make sure we stay within the time frame of 1 minute. If you're going over, we will cut you off. We'd like to get as many questions in as possible. So the first question: how do you plan on ensuring greater safety in our schools without creating an environment where students of color feel over-policed?
First of all, thank you for the question. We all have grown more and more concerned about the safety of our kids, especially after Parkland. And as a sitting board member, we take these situations very seriously. Immediately after Parkland, the school board directed the superintendent to have our staff do a complete review of our safety measures in our schools, and also to review best practices on how to keep our schools safe. At the same time, the state did an evaluation as well, and we both came to the same conclusions. First of all, we want to do those things where we have procedures in place to make sure that we have doors locked and things of that nature. But we also have a significant emphasis on providing mental health supports. What we found is that when children don't have the kinds of supports and relationships they need, these situations become more likely. So we want to make sure we have an emphasis on our procedures and we train, but we also provide mental health supports, and a minute is not enough. Thank you.
Yes, I agree, a minute is not enough. So in addition to what Karen mentioned with the mental health supports, I also, with my background working for nonprofit organizations, know that we can expand our partnerships with nonprofit organizations so that we can find a third way. Right now, Fairfax County has partnerships with Youth for Tomorrow, and they intervene with some of our most challenging students. It's even free to the county because Medicaid pays for this service. I have also worked with an organization called Violence Free Zones that hires young adults, many of whom have had brushes with the law in their past, but have turned their life around, often because of their faith. But they are very sensitive to kind of restorative justice and helping students move in positive directions. So I think there's a lot of creative things that we can do. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. I think one thing to think about when we're talking about safety for kids is that our middle schools and our high schools are both protected by school resource officers, but our elementary schools are not. And so one thing I would want to think about is how to protect those kids that are in elementary schools, because there are trailers and behind some of our elementary schools, and they are walking back and forth between the main building and there. So I would want to think about how to keep those children safe. When talking about student resource officers, remember these people are trained professionals. I'm not talking about arming teachers or random people in the building. I'm talking about trained members of society. And one way to keep children from feeling unsafe from them, we have come up with creative ways on planes. We have U.S. Air Marshals who are dressed like everyone else, and you don't know that there is a specialized person on the plane keeping that plane safe. That's one idea. Or also, when you go to fairs, you have kids going in and out of the police cars. They're very excited about our policemen. I think some creative, fun activities like that to get the children engaged with safety is a good idea.
So I actually participated last summer on Chairman Bolivar's commission on SROs and on the MOU between the FCPD and FCPS to make sure that our school resource officers had the proper training to make sure that they weren't unintentionally criminalizing our students. So this is something that I'm dear to my heart. A couple things that we should do. One, we need to get rid of our trailers. Trailers are not secure. We need to make sure we have closed buildings with proper buzz-in systems and identification systems to help reduce who can have access to the buildings when. I agree with Karen on mental health supports. We also need more behavioral intervention teachers to help with behavior. The other thing that hasn't gotten mentioned a lot is peer mentoring and belonging programs. For those students who feel isolated and feel like they need to do something horrific, if we have a way to get them to belong to their community, that can reduce those incidences. So proactive measures is the best way to go, and training for the SROs that we do have to prevent the criminalization of youth behavior.
So I want to start off by actually saying how much I appreciate this question, precisely because my concern when we talk about school safety is that we end up in a bit of a hysteria that leads us to make decisions that ultimately last for a long time and are deeply flawed or lead to bad outcomes. So obviously we have to ensure that our buildings are fortified, right? We want to continue supporting this idea that a random person can't just walk into any door, and the school board has done a great job at working on that already. Trailers are certainly a matter of concern we want to look into. But thinking of this in a way that's not mindful of potential injustices that occur could lead us to arming teachers and just leading to this environment of increasing SROs. My take on this is I really don't want to see any public safety official who hasn't been through cognitive bias training. And I don't just mean sensitivity training, I don't just mean implicit bias training, I'm talking about deeply understanding what biases we come with to ensure that we don't impact kids in negative ways. And I honestly am personally involved in things like this, and I just have no tolerance for that kind of behavior. And then of course, mental health and empathy, educational building. So getting kids to understand that they could have been, in a different life in each other's families, and that they could have come from similar walks of life. So building greater understanding. I know I have time, but anyway, love to talk about this more.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there is no compromise on safety. And from what you heard already, that we don't have the SROs in elementary schools. If we think that the SROs are helping middle schools and high schools, definitely SROs are required in elementary schools also. From what I heard, the main reason for us not having SROs in elementary schools is expenses. But I have some ideas where I spoke with some retired police officers, fully trained, fully licensed, and Fairfax County currently uses them for various purposes. Those people can be recruited to reduce the expenses because they don't have to pay overtime for them, and plus their even salaries, can be lesser. So whatever we do, we have to make sure that we are protecting the elementary schools as well. Yes, this is not a nice scenario. We have to do this, but at the same time, there is no compromise on security and safety of our children. Thank you.
So before we go to the next question, I neglected, there's a lot of different opinions up here, so let's make sure we're also respectful in the audience. No just outbursts, whether you agree or disagree, please. So Dominique will be asking the next question, and Cheryl, you'll be taking this one first.
Hi, everybody. So students of color are confronted with unique mental health needs as a result of discrimination, profiling, and xenophobia. How do you plan on employing and retaining counselors that understand and can help these students?
Well, thank you for that question. We do need to look at our hiring for counselors and make sure that we have a diversity among our counseling staff. I think that's very important. We also need to encourage students to develop peer relationships, both within the school, but also within their churches or mosques or synagogues, so that they have other peer-to-peer relationships, because peer relationships are a protective factor. And we need, regardless of race, we need to encourage our students to develop grit and say, okay, people may not like me because of the shape of my nose, but I'm going to work hard and I'm going to show them because I'm going to succeed.
So the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee recommended to the school board to hire more staff members of diverse backgrounds. More Black teachers, more Hispanic teachers, because right now only 5%, or I'm sorry, 7% of teachers are Black, and then only 4.5% of teachers are Hispanic. And so I think when these people come to the school, to Fairfax County, and they're qualified, I think there needs to be some more creative ways to actually get them to not only offer the job, but get them to accept it. And if this is something that has been proven in studies is going to help our minorities succeed, and that's something that we certainly have to emphasize and work towards, because right now our minorities have been failed by the school board. When looking at the report from the Oversight Committee, it said that they were celebrating their 27th year of having a committee for minority student achievement, and that is way too long. I want a school board, I dream of a school board that does not need a minority student achievement oversight committee to make sure that our minorities are achieving.
This is a great question. The question was specifically on counselors and how do we have counselors that better support and understand some of the biases that our students of color face. So I want to address specifically the question at hand. The first thing is we do need to look at our hiring practices and our principals and making sure that our hiring practices are, one, doing outreach to have more diverse counselors, because students see themselves reflected in their leaders. And if you come from a diverse background, you are able to somewhat reach a student from that background. So we need to look at our hiring practices and our outreach. We also need better training for our counselors in implicit bias, in cultural competency, so they understand the cultures and the values and the experiences of the students that they're serving. We have a huge gap between students of color and counselors of color, and that needs to be addressed, but it's also training to make sure they understand the needs of those students and understanding their own biases, because we all have them, but it's understanding them and not acting on that's important.
So when it comes to mental health, we have a lot to improve on in the school system broadly. We have ratios that are way above best practice levels. So I definitely want to see an increase in social workers and psychologists, even parent liaisons who end up working with communities and better understanding communities to elevate those needs. So when we talk about mental health being different when it comes to students of color or minorities, which is all too common, right? Sometimes a counselor doesn't relate or has these preconceived biases about a student. And so ensuring that that when we have those community conversations, those concerns can be elevated and brought to our attention sooner. But in ensuring that we provide better mental health supports in general, again, lowering those ratios, I also want to see an intentional effort to bring our schools, it's really a professional culture shift towards trauma-informed teaching and holistic education, that we cater to not only the academic needs of students, but their social and emotional development, their, again, mental health, and that we are aware of these traumas that are built up, honestly, of a lot of their experiences of discrimination growing up as well.
Counselors having the same type of experiences and background as the children, as the population that they're trying to serve is very important. That is actually the most critical aspect of having counselors, to understand what exactly the student is going through. But in addition to that, I would just say this. See, color itself is not a big a criteria. We have to have individualized plans. For example, somebody with a color, it doesn't fit into some of the situations of the counselor's activity. So we need to have individualized approaches to handling individual situations. A kid coming from single parent household versus two-parent household, a kid who is coming from economic situations that are far better than some others. So color is not just the qualifier. It has to be individualized approaches to handle mental health situations. And we need to have counselors who have that diverse background to handle that.
Thank you. I've served on the board for 2 years and have advocated since that time, first of all, for recognition of what this actually means. Statistics show that prolonged exposure to systemic racism actually creates trauma. So we have to be intentional about eradicating that. We have to provide professional development to our staff members so that they understand the student body. But also we had a lot of talk about diversity. providing a diverse workforce is beneficial to everyone, not just children of color. It enhances the academic experience, it enriches that environment. And so we need to, and I have advocated for greater diversity, particularly we need to get over what we call the mini-me approach. What we found is that if we don't have a diverse group of staff doing the hiring, you tend to end up with a less diverse staff. So I have recommended that we have a group of people to review our applicants so that is diverse to present those applicants to everyone else. So thank you so much.
Our members tell us that they often do not receive their full allotment of unencumbered planning time as required by FCPS policy. Please explain what actions you would take to ensure that professional educators receive the full allotment of unencumbered planning time for classroom instruction.
So this is something that is very critical to helping our teachers succeed because they are already overwhelmed and overburdened with all of the administrative tasks that they have to adhere to and all of the trainings that they have. I would certainly be open to figuring out teacher workdays that work not just for the teachers but for parents also, because you have to have a calendar that works for parents. If you throw in too many teacher workdays, parents cannot figure out what to do with their children on those days. And so it has to be something that is engaging for both the teachers and for both the parents. We need a school board that will engage both to figure this out and also try to lighten the administrative load on teachers because more and more trainings, yes, they need to be trained in all of these things and they understand that, you know, being trained on implicit bias and equity and all of these things are good things, but they are adding and adding and adding to their plate. They do not have an unlimited amount of time. And so we really need to figure out what's going to work best for teachers and for students.
So one of the things we really need to look at in terms of teacher planning time is how we're using those teacher work days. I've had a lot of teachers talk to me about the teacher work days being taken up when it's supposed to be their planning time or grading time with meetings that they feel that aren't as valuable as they should be. So I think we need to take a hard look at what we're doing in our training. Is it needed? How our principals are using that work time and make sure that they have that unencumbered work time. We also need to make sure we respect the work time they have built in during the day. So if there is teacher planning time during the day, we cannot be having administrators planning things on top of that. And at the end of the day, the reality is teachers need more support. This is especially true in special education where the teachers who have planning time or time during specials feel the need or feel or are obligated by IEP demands to accompany their children to specials. We need to have more supports for our teachers in their classrooms so they have the ability to plan during planning time. And we need to be more mindful of how we use those teacher work days to protect their planning time.
So there's no doubt that teachers are in the job, not because we pay them an incredible salary, but because they love the kids and they love the work that they're doing. And when I was, serving as co-chair of the HR committee, I had the pleasure of hearing from so many of our teachers' unions and different organizations that advocate for them. And we've heard, of course, that this time is often taken advantage of or planned for in ways that are not helpful to teachers. So we actually recommended, one of the things we were looking at was potentially quantifying these hours and seeing how much would we actually be paying teachers extra for hours that we're taking from them that are not used in the manner that we promised them. So that's one idea. The other is, of course, we need a reporting mechanism for staff. When, potentially an ombudsman or some formal thing, which we also recommended, because in our current scenario, if a staff member feels that their rights are infringed upon or something, occurred that isn't within what they were promised or the contract had said so, there's no real method to do that. And there's no peer review mechanism either where peers can say, yes, this is unfair. Instead, it's more so top-down administration. So providing those avenues where we can hear about some of these concerns and ensuring that we have red lines when it comes to this kind of stuff. We've made promises and contracts, we've got to keep to our commitments.
The primary reason we are hearing this complaint that they don't have planning time is things have changed in a way where we don't trust and empower our teachers. We put so much administrative burden on them, and that is why they don't have time to plan their educational material. So we all remember our teachers from our past days. They were authorities in their field, and they were not really given this type of so much of administrative burden that we have right now. And that's why we are still able to remember, because they were able to design their classes the way they see fit. So we have to hire the best, we have to retain the best, and we have to trust them and empower them much more than what we do right now. And the first thing that we can do to do that is to make sure we reduce administrative burden. Hire the best, trust them, empower them. They will have time to plan their educational activities. Don't burden them with unnecessary stuff. That would be my approach. Thank you.
So as a board member, I am committed to making sure or holding our system accountable to make sure we have a respectful, inclusive, and caring culture in our schools, especially for our staff. And I think that's reflected in the fact that I've been endorsed by both major teachers' unions. Some of the things that I have advocated for, I also try to make sure that I'm meeting with staff members. I have an open door policy with them so that they can come and meet with me and they don't have to worry about me reporting it to the superintendent. I want to improve communication with our staff members so that they feel that they can report. And one of the things that we put in place is the staff member ombudsman, where they can call in and get information about who can best deal with their situation. I'd also like to make sure that they can evaluate their leadership. We evaluate our employees all the time and give them a review, but I, as a board member, would like to see how our staff members feel about the folks that are running their schools, because that's how we learn what culture we have in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. As a board member, I want to make sure that we don't burden our teachers with a lot of top-down initiatives that become administrative hurdles that they have to overcome. So we can lighten their load. I am much more interested in bottom-up strategies where teachers and building principals are able to initiate programs that they know that will work. And actually my role as a board member would be like a blocker on a football team. So I am charging ahead and giving them space to develop programs that they know are in the best interest of kids. Interestingly, on another front, I discovered that we have increased the number of teachers over the last 10 years. We have an additional 1,400, almost 1,500, but we have 620 fewer support staff. We need to look at that mix in our schools.
Thank you, and please remember to hold your applause. Our members tell us that FCPS guidelines and training for educators regarding student discipline are inefficient. What actions do you plan to take to ensure that FCPS institutes clear processes and the needed training for all staff regarding student discipline in a way that does not weigh punitively against these educators?
It's a really tough balance to make sure that our staff have the right training and that they need, especially when it comes to student discipline, without punishing our staff for doing the best that they're doing in their classrooms in situations where they're having to make decisions on the fly. The first thing we need to do in terms of training our staff around student discipline is making sure they understand that behavior is communication, and making sure they understand that while the student might be acting up, how do we get that student the supports they need to address the underlying issues? We also need to make sure that when staff are interacting with students in a way that is inappropriate, that we have mechanisms in place to mentor and train the staff as opposed to just punishing the staff. I think that's a really, really important thing to do, is that everybody is human, and so you need to give them the chance to learn, both for the students and the staff. But at the end of the day, again, it comes down to support. It comes down to implementation support. It's not just training the teachers on restorative justice practices, training the teachers on trauma-informed education. It is making sure they have the support to then implement those practices. And if they're not implementing them the way they need to be implemented, they have the support to learn from their mistakes.
So it's certainly a matter of, student discipline, the disparities involved with that, administrators and teachers' involvement as well, and making sure we're fair to them. I mentioned before cognitive bias training. I'm also interested in seeing, as I said, peer review boards and whatnot for teachers that evaluate them so that it is peer-to-peer and you have a more under experienced or relatable assessment of that teacher's performance. And I want to also address the matter of student discipline and the disparities involved with that. Ensuring that when we train teachers that it's actually a training that's useful to them and that they want to go through. We've heard actually from a number of staff in the building, SROs, throughout the MOU process that was referred to through Skip's efforts, that they in fact want more sensitivity training or some sense of understanding of what these biases are. So working with them really ends up being about involving the community, hearing from teachers unions, hearing from our staff organizations to ensure that we're doing it in a way that in fact meets their needs without leading to these inefficient results that don't end up helping anybody. So being a more responsive school board.
The reason we are hearing these complaints, it's not because we have bad teachers. It's not because we have the least amount of training for the teachers. The reason we are hearing this because the teachers are overloaded. Their primary responsibility is to provide the education and have the test scores, whatever they are demanded by the system. But when problem situations come, they don't have the time or the resources to cope up with this. So we need to have a multi-layered approach where there is some kind of a mechanism where if there's a problem situation, the teacher has enough help from counselors or from whoever in the school system can help to deal with that situation. When we are not providing that resource, that is when the teachers, because of their pressures, they act maybe in a way that is not the best for that particular child. So I would suggest that individualized approaches to deal with specific students and making sure that we are not overloading teachers with bureaucratic administrative burdens.
Just so I make sure I understood the question, could you read it again, please?
Our members tell us that FCPS guidelines and trainings for educators regarding student discipline are inefficient. What actions do you plan to take to ensure that FCPS institutes clear processes and the needed training for all staff regarding student discipline in a way that does not weigh punitively against educators?
So this is an issue that we actually are dealing with on the board right now. It was very clear to me when I came on the board and I was focused on why do we have such significant disparities? A child who is African American, a person of color, special education, and boys could be disciplined 3 times more often than their counterparts. But we're also always concerned about our staff members, and we did do extensive revisions to our discipline to try to deal with those disparities. In addition to that, we did put in place professional development to try to make sure that our staff members understand how to implement this. I realize that this is a fluid situation, and so what I have asked for is continual reporting from our leadership teams to make sure that we understand the impact of what we've done to try to address these disparities and take care of our staff members. I also put forth a budget amendment for behavior intervention teachers to provide additional supports to help teachers deal with difficult behaviors, what they may see as behaviors, which may actually be the way that child is communicating.
Teachers are our precious resource, and we do need to make sure that they have all the tools that they need in order to run their classroom. They have a tremendous responsibility because they have to deal with behavior issues as they come up and deal with them in a way that is restorative, but they also have an obligation to their class to keep the education process moving forward. So I have heard from teachers as I've been on the campaign trail that they get endless surveys, but they wonder whether their feedback is actually taken into consideration. And I will change that. I want to make sure that our teachers, our voices are heard. And again, use nonprofit organizations. That's what Youth for Tomorrow does, is behavior intervention with our most challenging students.
So I think for anyone in any career profession, there's always room to grow and develop, especially for our teachers. But to do that, it needs to be thoughtful and in a meaningful way. And I think to figure that out, we should be tapping into our most valuable resource, which is our students. We already question our students on a number of things for surveys. My problem with the school board is that I think we prioritize the wrong things over the right things. And so, for example, my sixth grader, I just got a letter that he would be participating in a survey that asks him about behaviors that he does, or has he ever tried marijuana? Has he ever drank alcohol? Has he ever huffed, aerosol sprays? Questions like that, where really we should be asking questions like, have you ever felt treated unjustly? Did you ever feel like you were on the wrong side of a discipline action or something? Thoughtful questions that can help our students, and we can figure out what's going on with them, but also how to train our teachers better. Those are the questions that we should be prioritizing and asking them. And if we're already surveying them, we should survey the right things.
We'll start down. Okay, great. So what is your stance following the steps of Justice High School and renaming schools that have Confederate names?
All right, so I can take a guess at what this audience feels, but there's been a lot of talk about how this is inefficient, how millions of dollars in the school board has been spent, wasted on this. I really want to clear that up. This is a critical, when we make a choice as to what names are on our buildings, on the jerseys of students in class, on the walls of our schools, this is something that's a choice of who we honor and who we decide, led to a positive impact in our history. This is a conversation that's not even worth having, really, because it's high time. We need to see the changes that resemble the values of our community. When we have a community that's nearly majority minority, when more than 50% of our students speak a second language at home, have unique backgrounds and histories, this is just about time. And then to also expand the conversation, because a lot of people are going to say it's not just about names. Of course it's not just about names, but they signify something critical. We need to see how else discrimination exists, what we're teaching in our history, how we're ensuring we're inclusive of all people and all experiences, and really teaching the truth.
I come from India. We have a very big colonial past, and this renaming business is going on big time there. So my personal opinion is I'm against renaming, because if you erase history by renaming, then we tend to repeat it. So we have to learn from history and move on. But at the same time, when it comes to the decisions that make a school name change, the community has to decide that. If the majority of the population in that school district decides the school name has to be changed, absolutely. And that means that that is a genuine case of having to own some real bad names for the school. But if the community, if the parents don't want it, if the children don't want it, in the case of Jeff Stewart High School, majority of the parents and majority of the students and overwhelming majority of the parents didn't want the change. But we still went ahead and did the change. And that is what I don't like. I'm a citizen participation person. So I believe in the citizens having the voice. So I would say we have more needs for that money. We have 800 trailers and 20,000 children in the trailers. So we have to work on that first, so that we can have learning environments that are going to produce good results first. Thank you.
Brad.
So as part of our strategic plan, we work toward creating a caring, respectful environment for everyone within our schools. And we are an educational institution, so we cannot ignore how those names got on our schools. The Confederacy represents fighting to keep an institution that dehumanized people of color, particularly African Americans, that arrived as the first enslaved people in 1619. This last meeting on Thursday, we did a resolution to acknowledge that, but we have not in our history acknowledged the tragedy, the terror, the murder, the rape that has represented. And that is wrong. And to put those names on our schools and expect us to pay for it and expect our children to feel respected is just plain wrong.
No one is advocating naming a school in 2019 after Confederate General. We have existing schools. We are a hybrid model of a school district where it is county-wide, but we have neighborhood schools. And I have spent time at Justice High School. I have talked to parents. It is a majority-minority school. Those parents are furious at the school board for just trampling over their wishes. They didn't want the name changed. They came up with 4 compromises that the school board rejected. And so are we going to trample minority voices? Are we going to trample neighborhood schools and their preferences or not?
So my issue with renaming is not in defense of the Confederacy or keeping a name like that on a school. My problem is priorities. Because right now, we do not have enough money to change the names of all the schools that they want to change and take care of everything else. I will read you from the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. They said there is currently no line item in the budget specifically for closing the achievement gap. If FCPS is committed to closing all achievement, opportunity, and access gaps, there must be sufficient funding by individual programs so that sufficient resources are available to do so. That means there's not enough money to actually close the minority achievement gap. So why are we focused on the letters of the building rather than programs that are actually going to affect our students in the schools? That's what I want to work on. I want to work on actually directly affecting achievement. And then later, change all the names that you want. Work it into the renovation cycle. But folks, right now, there's over $800 million of backlog in schools that have not been renovated because there's not enough money. We need to prioritize the right things.
So a couple things. I am also the child of immigrants. And when I was growing up in California, my culture was not well understood. And I knew what it felt like to be othered in the school. We cannot have buildings named for people who wanted to enslave part of the children's families who are attending that school. We just cannot send that message to our students. I want to cover a couple things that were brought up. There is a difference between studying history and celebrating it by names on buildings or statues. I am all about studying history because that's how you learn from your mistakes. But we do not celebrate people who want to enslave others by having them on names of buildings. It is a priority. I agree. Closing the achievement gap is a priority also. That's why we have a great program called Project Momentum in our schools that is aimed at helping close that achievement gap. We do have programs, but we have to have a caring culture. The other thing I will say about, my parents are also from India. Not long ago, the name Bombay, which was the city name for a long time, was changed to Mumbai, one of the most populous cities in the world, and that was fine. I think we can do it to our school names. We cannot celebrate those who want to enslave others. We cannot celebrate that history. We just need to learn from it.
How do you plan on bridging the gap between quality and quantity of resources we see given to schools in more affluent communities compared to those not as fortunate?
Can you repeat that question?
How do you plan on bridging the gap between the quality and quantity of resources we see given to schools in more affluent communities compared to those not as fortunate?
I mean, from the way I see it, I don't think that the school system, FCPS, is having a different way of allocating funds to different schools. That is a misconception if that is the case. Yes, affluent parents bring in new programs. Yes, affluent parents definitely send their children to enrichment programs that are helping them. So when it comes to minority achievement gap, I strongly believe that the communities that are doing well, not the communities, the students who are doing really well, irrespective of their skin color or racial ethnic background, they are doing well, not because of FCPS, but in spite of FCPS. Their parents send their children to enrichment programs and tutoring after school, and that's what make those kids do well in tests. So the school system is definitely the same everywhere. We have the same curriculums, we have some programs that are in some schools because of the student need, the students requiring it. I remember, one of the programs that was cut in McLean High School when my son was really registered for that, and the next year it's not available. So those things are happening everywhere in all the schools. So I don't believe that there is a disparity. That's time.
I really want to keep answering the last question. First of all, names do impact our academics, and Justice High School is a prime example. We have seen, I believe, a revitalization of that school because kids are taking a greater pride, and we have improved our numbers in that school and making great strides. Let me try to answer this question. With respect to quantity versus quality, we have a focus on equity right now to make sure that we are delivering our services with fidelity across the county. And we have an equity lead, which is a volunteer teacher who wants to help us focus on this issue to report to us what some of those discrepancies may be. I put forth an initiative with respect to review of advanced academics. It does show that just as we have disparities in discipline, we have disparities in children participating in advanced academics. And so we are now experimenting to try to make those critical thinking skills more available to all students in their earlier grades, and we are seeing significant progress.
We do need to rebound. First of all, if we do an audit, and I would advocate that we need an independent auditor. Currently, the Auditor General works within the system and has a limited scope. I would like to look at our funding priorities and make sure that we don't have disparities between buildings. But I can tell you, I had a conversation with a woman right here at First Baptist when I was here for Juneteenth. She said, I'm a PTA president. Our school is run down. We don't have security cameras in our parking lot. Our carpet is all torn up. Ceiling tiles are stained. That sends a message. And yes, we have a $50 million backlog in programs that fix our facilities, not to mention the renovations. So I will look at a top-down appraisal of our resource allocation.
So this is a perfect example of what to do with the money from changing names. Rather than using that money to change the name on the building, that $500,000 that it costs to change the name of Jeff Stewart could have gone into extracurricular activities, into purchasing things for programs. I think there needs to be a holistic approach for helping to close the minority achievement gap and engaging children in other activities outside of school, keeping them busy, showing them that they are valued, that there's more than just school, and that comes from spending money. And that money could have been better spent than in changing the names. And I think that there needs to be money that's moved around. And one more example, the stats from Justice after the name change are actually flat. They did not improve.
All right, so this question is really about equity, and equity means each child has an opportunity for excellent education, which I really firmly, strongly believe in. So there's a few things that you can do to address the resource issue. One is you want to have needs-based staffing and needs-based resources. So you're putting staffing and resources towards the school that have a bigger achievement gap to help that school out. We can also expand Project Momentum, which again is a program aimed at helping close that achievement gap at lower performing schools. One of the things I would love to do, which the school board can't do, but we can encourage the PTAs to do, is what I call a sister PTA project. A lot of the inequities in schools are because certain PTAs have a lot more money than other PTAs do, and maybe we can encourage some of the PTAs in the wealthier parts of the county to adopt PTAs in other parts, and even do cross-school programs and classes to get children from across the county to get to know each other. I would also like to see partnerships with community organizations and some of the tech companies moving in to adopt the school programs to bring enrichment into those schools. In New Jersey, they have an adopt the school program to help bring some of that enrichment to schools that need resources. There's lots of ways to bring in resources. That doesn't mean having names on buildings that dehumanize some of our students.
So I think all of us can agree that it's incredible that we live in a county that has nearly 9% poverty rate. As we said, almost majority minority speaks over 160 languages, and we still have significant disparities. In fact, in Fairfax County today, race is a predictor of whether you're going to be successful or not. And this is, students who are Hispanic or African American lag behind 20 to 30 points when it comes to academic achievement. I mean, this is just the facts show us this problem. The budget then can be used either as an excuse or as a tool of empowerment for us to put forth what our priorities are. I don't think that it's enough to have volunteers in our schools working on this. I think if we're intentional, we have to put forth money. Montgomery County did an incredible job setting aside staff deliberately working on this full time. And we have, of course, the equity lead, or the new hire, but we need to see more of that. We are a county of 1.2 million people. We serve nearly 200,000 students. That's certainly the case. So hiring more liaisons.
That's time.
So, yeah.
Tina will be asking the final question.
So, a recent study found that there is a widespread racial bias in hiring in Fairfax County Public Schools. The study found that Black applicants for teaching positions were far less likely than white candidates to get job offers on an average, even though they had more advanced degrees and more classroom experience. What will you do to improve hiring and retention of diverse educators, particularly Black educators in Fairfax County?
Also, I think this was a George Mason University study.
Right, yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Koch brothers did it.
It was from 2012.
Okay.
So this is an issue I came on the board actually working on and concerned about. And so I've made numerous recommendations. And this year I am actually the audit chair. We have an independent auditor that reports directly to the school board. And I have asked that we look at what is happening with our diverse employees, particularly our African Americans. We already receive reports, and I've asked for demographic information of who is coming into our schools, what are the demographics of those folks, and who is leaving. And so I'm hoping that by requiring accountability and making sure that the school board is putting forth some oversight, that we make sure that we address this concern. Definitely, we have to improve the culture within our schools for our teachers, for our folks of color. I've talked to a number of teachers that feel that they have the additional pressures that shouldn't be there. And so I want to make and have worked to keep myself available to make sure that we're hearing from them so that we can do continuous improvement.
Yes, I looked at that report and was horrified by that. I have also talked with a variety of administrators who said that they have trouble finding minority candidates. They said they'd hire them today, if they were coming in. So I think that we need to be vigilant and see what's going on. I also know that we spend a lot of money sending recruiters to universities, and by all means that's important. But I also want to grow our own teachers. We have a teacher cadet corps. I want to expand that, especially for promising students of color.
So this is a nationwide issue. There's a demand for minority teachers all over the country. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but that's something that we do need to be focused on, because the report also said that a child in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, if they have a Black teacher, they're more likely to go onto a 4-year university. And so there certainly needs to be more data figuring out like why the jobs weren't offered to people who are qualified, and then figuring out how to attract them. But also what Cheryl touched on is raising our own teachers in Fairfax County. There's so many students in here that would thrive as teachers, and if there were opportunities, if there were programs for them, I mean, we use, George Mason is right here in Fairfax County. We have an internship program for the teachers that are in their schools. There was more, a similar program, but on the opposite side in high school. I think that would be wonderful. And then one more thing to touch on, Hispanic kids make up 25% of the population in schools, and they have even less teachers in schools. So it also needs to be focused on Hispanic, and it starts from the top, and I really hope I can represent that community on the school board.
Priscilla, I just have a quick follow-up. You said the recruiters go out to universities. What do you think about going out to more HBCUs?
Oh, I would love that. Howard University is right here in DC. I mean, people fall in love with the city. They fall in love with their communities when they go to universities. And so they like to stay close. And I would love to retain or to go out and recruit specifically from historically Black universities, especially when we have one so close, where they fall in love with DC and they want to stay. And if we can bring them to Fairfax County, it would be fabulous for not only our students, but the people who went through the program. I would love that.
Do we all get a follow-up?
No.
But I actually know about that. So why does she get additional time?
Because I'm the moderator.
Oh, I'll use it in my closing. Thank you.
So while I agree, I would love to have more recruiting at historically Black colleges as well as other colleges that are higher populations of minority students. I think it's important to expand our Teachers for Tomorrow's program in schools that have a higher minority population to help recruit from within. But the question was specifically on hiring and why we have issues in hiring and Black applicants who are more qualified or hired less. I want to address that issue specifically. I teach diversity and cultural competency, and I run a human resources minor. So I have seen this problem mirrored throughout our society, that applicants of color are more qualified and less hired. And that goes straight to bias, implicit bias within our hiring staff. And that's what we need to address. We need to have implicit bias training for our staff. We need to have hiring panels, so it's not just one person. And we need to have more administrators of color, because people do hire people, quote unquote, like them. So those are the things that we need to address in terms of hiring people of color. Building the pipeline is also incredibly important, but that was what the question was about.
Okay, so I think, we all know the importance of role models for kids, whether that's teachers, whether that's the staff in the building, administration, principals, and the idea that you can't be what you can't see, representation matters. And we know that that is not only a high ideal and a moral imperative, but it's something that, in fact, influences student achievement and a student's sense of belonging in a building. So this is critically important. I want to address the topic of discriminatory hiring. Rashon just alluded to it, or mentioned it as well. But I want to clarify that this is not a situation where we're picking out minority candidates just because we want to give them an advantage over others, right? That this is kind of what it's been said to be, and it's publicly out there now. People think this is what it is. But it's critically important for us to pay attention to the fact that we have already put ourselves in a situation where we have discriminated, and over time led to outcomes where we know the studies show us you can have a resume that is exactly the same, but a different name will lead to a different outcome. So this is what we're really talking about. So incentivizing that diverse hiring, whether it's appreciating teachers that are minorities. God, so many things we can say about that.
If this is happening, that is an outright violation of the current laws and the rules and regulations we have. And this is an example, again, decades of the same type of people leading the school board, not providing the oversight, having a lot of sweet talk, but less action. And that is, this is a resounding proof for that. So that is where I come in as a school board member who will provide the right oversight. I would say that the school board has to be responsible for something like this happening. You cannot just say that, okay, this is administration, what we can do. We have to go after the individual cases and what happened in such scenarios, and there has to be punishment. This is not right. This is outright violation of the current laws, and that cannot be tolerated. And then you mentioned about the going to the black colleges. I don't know why we are not doing it. I thought we are doing it already. I mean, this is, again, for my understanding, we have to. If there is a complaint already, there is a racial, imbalance, then definitely that is the first step to do. So, absolutely.
Well, thank you to all the candidates. Before we go into the closing, there were some cards that individuals gave, or questions that individuals gave on index cards. A lot of them overlapped actually with what we already drafted. But some, just to give you an idea of them, do you all have children in the school system that inspires you to run and make a difference? I'm an FCPS graduate with a learning disability. While I was lucky enough to have a parent to advocate for me, many students are not as fortunate. What will you do to ensure all students receive support they need? I am a school teacher who cannot afford to work in the district I teach in. What will you do to help the many teachers with this same problem? So, I encourage the audience, of course, we have the fireside chat coming up with Steve after this, but I encourage the audience to visit with the candidates. If the candidates, I know you have a long day ahead of you, I'm sure, and a long weekend. But if you're willing to stay around for the audience until around 12:45, 1 o'clock, I'm sure they will really appreciate meeting with you all. Like I said, Steve and his campaign are here, but I am a man of my word, and I gave you 2 minutes. So we will start with Karen for closing. And Karen, if you want to touch on that HBCU. Go ahead.
Got a few things I want to touch on.
But it's still 2 minutes, Karen.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm on this board for 2 years, and I came on this board focused on removing barriers to education, and I hit the ground running. One of the first things I worked on along with my colleagues was to make sure that we take care of our staff members, that we work toward competitive salaries. We invested over the last 4 years. We continue to do that in the 2 years that I've been on the board. We've invested about $400 million to try to address that concern. I've worked on advanced academics, put forth a budget amendment to improve special education and to take care of our teachers, significant discipline revisions. But I want to talk about some of the things that have been stated here today. First of all, with respect to hiring, we have significantly changed our approach, and we do go to HBCUs. We do hold employment fairs there, and we are specifically reaching out to that community and every other community of color. And we are requiring our HR department to report to the school board with respect to what progress they are making. My job, and I take it very seriously, is to hold this system accountable. And my job is to make sure that no matter where I am, your voice is heard in that situation. So I want you to know that that has not been overlooked. We also have a Teachers for Tomorrow program where we are growing our own. We just handed out promises to some of our students who said they're going to focus on teaching, and we give them a promise of employment if they go and get their 4-year degree. Now, with respect to Justice High School, I want to talk a little bit about Project Momentum with respect to how we are wrapping around services to schools that have had difficulty. The first thing you need to know about Justice High School is they have one of the highest percentage of students coming into the school with interrupted education. And so we may have 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds who haven't had education at all, or they've had interrupted education, and we're working to serve those students. Despite that, their numbers have gone up, and I have them here if you'd like to see them. My 2 minutes is up. Thank you so much, Karen, for FairfaxKids.com.
I am running for school board because I want every single child in this county to succeed. I know that my opponents share this passion as well, but every day I come to an even stronger conclusion that their methods and their way of addressing the minority achievement gap and the other issues in our schools just won't work. I urge you, do not experiment with our children's future. I urge you, do not give the current school board a $12 billion blank check. I will safeguard neighborhood schools. I will make sure that we champion academic rigor. Did you know that 50% of our graduates that go to Northern Virginia Community College have to take remedial writing? This is not filling out blanks on an SOL test. They can't write, and that is wrong. We need to champion multiple pathways to a good paying job, expand our ROTC, career technical education, and internships. The military was my father's pathway out of poverty, and we need to explore multiple pathways for our students. 75% of them start college, less than 45% graduate in 6 years. That's wrong. I also want to encourage grit and independent critical thinking in our students. Academics from both the left and the right tell us, send us students that can argue both sides of an issue and respect those with whom they disagree. We need to make sure that we're doing that, and I will champion that as a school board member. Remember, I will always work for you. And my name is Cheryl Buford. I ask for your vote on November 5th.
So to answer one of those questions, I was inspired to run for my son. I had my son very young. I mentioned that in my opening. I became pregnant with him when I was 17. He's now 12 and he's in 6th grade. I graduated from K through 12 and I'm seeing him go through K through 12 right now. And I do not want our parents in Fairfax County to be left behind from being the primary educators in our students' life. And that's what I feel like as I've gone on year after year with Fairfax County. And whether it's by intention or by ignorance, either way, it's unacceptable. But it's getting harder and harder to work a full days of work and then come home and then try to educate my son, but not be able to open up a textbook or to not be able to find the curriculum online. The excuses have changed. It's not my dog ate my homework. It's I couldn't access because my Wi-Fi wasn't working. The county is changing, and I really don't want our parents or students to be left behind. And when I mentioned my experiences are not unique to me. I have been on the wrong side of the discipline actions in school. I had to transfer to a whole different school in my county, a school where a lot of kids are transferred because they were on the wrong side of discipline as well. I have my son who's 3 and he's in the special needs program. I'm starting that IEP process now. I mean, there's so many voices that are not represented by this board. Right now, to me, it feels like there's a group of people that are elitists sitting at the top and they're pushing down all these policies on us. When they talk about the minority achievement gap, 9 of them are not minorities. The school board is not representative of us. I want people on the school board who not only represent us, but come from our communities. I am a child of immigrants. My mother was a single mother. I was a single mother myself raising my son in Fairfax County. I know how hard it is to afford to live in Fairfax County. There's so many perspectives that I want to bring to the board, and forgive me, but a recent graduate from Yale or a Berkeley educated attorney, you cannot tell me that they understand what it means to be underprivileged and grow up in this county, because they are certainly the epitome of privilege. Thank you.
So my parents came here as immigrants with nothing. They use education to better their lives and teach me the value of education. My dad was a Fulbright scholar at Stanford. My mother was a groundbreaking woman in India, getting a PhD in mathematics thanks to a scholarship by Indira Gandhi at IIT in India when no women were doing this in the 1960s. So they do understand, and she started her life as a refugee. So I do understand what it's like to come from nothing and get a good education. I am here because of my children. I am here because I spent 12 years working in special education and juvenile justice in the schools, outside the schools, as an attorney, as a parent advocate, as a college professor. I know the skills your children need. But I am here because we have a great school system for those kids that fit in their bucket. right? But if you're like my daughter who's sitting right over here, who was in the advanced program, but when she had some mental health issues, the first thing they said is, let's take her out of her advanced program, we can do better. If you're like my son, who has autism and significant communication challenges, but is a brilliant musician who was not allowed to be in a strings concert because he was afraid of his autism, we can do better. If you're like my stepson, who's that gen ed brilliant kid who was lost in the middle, we can do better. I am here because I want a strengths-focused education where every child is seen for what they can do, not what they can't do, because your deficit should not become all of who you are if you're in Fairfax County. I have a track record of 12 years of seeing a problem and fixing it for everybody. When my son was segregated in his classroom, I went to the school and we revised all of the IEP forms to focus on inclusion. When I found out children like my son could not get a diploma that would allow them to go to college, that my Mozart couldn't go to music school, I went to Richmond, and in 9 months I got a path put in place for children so tens of thousands can go to college. That is what I bring. I am here not for my children. My child who's in high school, my daughter, they're doing great because they've had me. They've had my voice. I am here to be the voice, the true voice, for all of those children of immigrants, special education, mental health issues, those children and the families who need that voice. My name is Rachna Sizemore-Heiser. I hope you have your vote. Thank you.
Because I actually ended up at Yale, that I want to make sure every child has that opportunity, and not just to go to Yale, but to be successful, to be believed in. My father came to this country speaking no word of English. They were 8 kids living in a 2-bedroom house, a small house, in the lower income community here in Fairfax County. And it was because of the teachers in Fairfax that held his hand to be able to become successful, and because of what he saw in the schools that he chose to raise us here. And it's precisely because of the opportunity that I saw lost, the potential that wasn't taken advantage of in the kids that were my friends and my peers growing up here. It's precisely because I don't have a kid in the school, and my skin in the game was those personal relationships and the things I saw, the disparities when my friend flunked out of algebra because she couldn't afford a tutor, or because a student was struggling in silence, had mental health challenges, was cutting themselves, and we all know this happens way too often. But the school system didn't have those resources, and the stigma was there that they couldn't talk to their parent. I'm thinking about that parent who doesn't come to PTA meetings to support her kid because she is afraid that ICE is going to pick her up on the side of the street. Or that family who wants to help their kids so desperately but works 2-3 jobs and just can't make the time, or perhaps doesn't have the language or the know-how to support their kid in Algebra 2 or calculus. These are the kids I'm thinking about. In Fairfax County, we've nearly doubled in population since 80, when we've looked at boundaries in a serious way, or when we've had these conversations to talk about equity, to be intentional about it. The fact that it's not a budget item for us means that we have a lot of work to do, and we have significant poverty and challenges. When we think of that American dream and that we claim we're one of the best counties, we provide one of the best school systems, where is that for minorities? Where is that for lower income people who, if they didn't fall to be rich, they don't have that? And it's precisely because my family provided that for me that I feel truthfully, in a sense, we're lying to some people in this community. And I want to make sure we uplift everyone. We're not successful until everyone is. That's why my motto is the leader in every child, because I want to make sure we provide those resources and make this a place that's where everyone can be successful.
Dear friends, I am sitting here at the African American Church on a stage given to me by NAACP with a deep sense of gratitude. African Americans were a massive part of building this nation, much bigger than you were given credit for. As an American, I am thankful for that. But I'm thankful to you for more personal reason. You all call us the immigrants, highly successful in this country. But we were able to build our successes because your parents and grandparents made our paths and kept it all ready for us when we came. They toiled on the soil, they shed blood, they gave lives. They suffered big time, but they endured. And they opened up the gates for all of us to come and enjoy the fruits of their suffering. I feel outright irresponsible and ungrateful to enjoy our American dream when some children and grandchildren of those who prepared the way for us, made our paths straight, are still suffering prejudices and injustices. When a good number of them are still trapped in the vicious circle of dependency created and maintained by unscrupulous politicians who just care about being in power. My dear brothers and sisters, it's time for change. We are all one people. There is no reason to have all these color labels when we are dealing with issues. High achievement happens when all the resources and ingredients are in place. Those are same for all people. I will work hard and smart and innovatively to make sure that those necessary resources and opportunities are available for all of our students. We need a breath of fresh air. Vote for real change on November 5th. I have a very detailed website with my ideas and my plans for the future. winsonforschoolboard.com. That's Winson with a V for victory. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all the candidates. Let's give them one more hand. Also, when you, after the fireside chat, this, like you said, the candidates have their link in the back, displaying their ideals. Also, Monet's, oh, this is not me, I'm sorry. Monet is back here with Virginia majority as well. I'm sure you're all registered to vote. I hope so. If not, go visit her. If you'd like to get involved with the New Virginia majority, also go see her. Steve, thank you for showing up. Sorry that I went a little bit longer, but I'm going to introduce Sean, and then we're going to shuffle these 6 out, and then shuffle Steve up here. All right, let's.
And while the candidates are leaving the stage, I just want to say thank you again for participating. Thank you so much for coming here today. It's so important to hear from all of you and hear your perspectives. Really quickly, the NAACP obviously is a nonpartisan organization. I always say we're not a non-political organization. We have positions on a lot of these issues that were discussed. For the renaming of Jeb Stuart High School, obviously we were very involved in renaming it Justice. For the naming of Robert E. Lee High School, we are obviously pushing for the renaming. One of the things that came up during our discussion here was the sense of the community did not want this. The NAACP has been in Fairfax County for 101 years. We are part of this community. So I just want to clarify that the community did want this in this room, a lot of us. And that, the talk about cost was always an interesting one, because keep in mind when someone throws around figures like 400 to 500,000, that's 0.0137% of the $2 billion budget that we have. So I just want to put some context to some of the things that we discussed. And as you know, we're very active in what the school's discipline system should look like. We've pushed very hard for police officers not to be in elementary schools. The reason we've done that is because one of the things that we know, and we know this from data-backed evidence, the GAO released a study that when you have police officers in schools, the people who are punished are people of black background and disabled students. That's the statistics nationwide. Fairfax County is no different. We see the disproportionality there. When we got involved in the Memorandum of Understanding, we saw a 60% decrease in the number of arrests after that. When we got involved when renaming Justice, we were told that justice would fall apart and the students, wouldn't be successful. The superintendent this last week awarded an equity award to Justice for improvement in test scores. This is something that happened. So I want to make sure that everyone knows what our positions are, and that the reason we have these candidates forums is so that you can hear how candidates align or don't align. But I still appreciate every single person that came here today. I hope that every candidate, guys, can you hold on for a second with the talking in the back? So I hope that every single candidate that was here will stick around to interact with our audience. We're going to do a fireside chat right now with Steve Descano. He's running as the Democrat for the Commonwealth Attorney. We invited the other candidate who's running as an independent, Jonathan Fahey, and he declined our request. So we're going to go forward and just talk to Steve about some of those issues, and then we'll open it up for questions. But I do hope that the school board candidates can stick around and participate with us. But thank you again. So we'll transition, get Steve up here, and we'll have our talk. So again, this is not our usual format. Usually we have it almost debate style, but like I said, Steve's opponent did not want to be with us here today. So we're going to give Steve a minute and a half to sort of introduce himself. From there, I will ask some questions of Steve regarding the campaign and policies that are important to the organization. And then from there, we'll open it up to audience questions. So let's begin.
Hi, everyone. I am Steve Toscano. I'm the Democratic nominee for Fairfax County Commonwealth's Attorney. And, you know, first I want to say that I'm so thankful to have been asked to be here by the NAACP. It's an organization that I have been a member of, part of for many, many years. You know, focusing specifically on criminal justice reform issues. And I'm so proud to be a part of this organization that shares our community values. And the role that I'm running for, Commonwealth's Attorney, values are actually incredibly important. Most people think of this job as simply the county's chief prosecutor. And my background is as a prosecutor. I traveled around this country for 6 years doing cases at the highest level of our judiciary, but I have to tell you that the job is really a leadership job. It is to make sure that the values of our community are reflected in our criminal justice system, and I've been doing that for a long, long time. First as a West Point graduate, member of the U.S. Army, someone who's led small businesses, and somebody who's been involved in the community, not only with the NAACP, but as the NAACP's representative to the county's police civilian review panel, bringing oversight to police activities and community engagement. And I will tell you, I want to bring those leadership and that leadership experience and our values to this position of Commonwealth's Attorney. That's why when I'm your Commonwealth's Attorney, I'm going to build a criminal justice system that treats everybody fairly, regardless of the color of their skin, how much money they make, where they come from. One that takes a holistic approach to build us up as a community instead of one that breaks us down. And one that focuses on real justice, because we know that the only true path to community safety is justice. Now, that is what I intend to do in this role. There is a huge difference between me and my Republican-backed opponent who declined to show up today. My opponent is someone who is the officially endorsed Republican nominee. He's somebody who was a political appointment to the Donald Trump administration. And in that role, he was the general counsel for the drug czar, pushing the war on drugs. So what that says to me is he wants to bring those Donald Trump values, those policies that have ruined families, destroyed lives, and broke down communities for decades. And that's something we can't have here in Fairfax. As a matter of fact, those are really the stakes here. When I was endorsed earlier last week by the Washington Post, they made a point of telling everyone how important these races are. And that's what the Post knows, is what I want each and every one of you to know, is that the race is not about me and it's not about my opponent. It is about something bigger than that. This election is about whether or not we are going to live the values that we talk about every single day in Fairfax. This election is about the type of world we're going to build for our kids and our grandkids. This election is about nothing less than whether or not we in Fairfax County are finally going to be on the right side of history when it comes to criminal justice. I hope that during this chat we have the opportunity to talk about all the issues that are important to you, and then you can see that a vote for me on November 5th is going to be a vote for putting Fairfax County on the right side of history. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So just to kick this off, this election has felt a little different as far as the Commonwealth Attorney. All throughout the state, there's been a lot of contentious primary races for Commonwealth Attorney. Could you give us your perspective on what the Commonwealth Attorney can do to reform the criminal justice system, since it's not a legislative position?
That's actually a great question. And I will say that you're right. There have been a number of very spirited races for this position. Because I will tell you that when we talk about criminal justice reform, we talk about the problems in our criminal justice system, like mass incarceration. What a lot of people don't realize, but they're starting to realize, is that the person who is most powerful in the system, it's not the police, it's not the judges, it's the prosecutor. And therefore, the person who is most responsible for the problems that we have and has the most ability to fix it is your prosecutor. So we are, even though it's not a legislative position, through the use of prosecutorial discretion, your prosecutor can do things that if they want to be a leader, which is what I want to be, and get away from just the status quo that's failed us, can actually make a huge impact. We are talking about things like trying to get rid of things that treat people differently based on how much money they have. A great example is cash bail, right? I'm sure you all know that cash bail is people are arrested and they may be held in jail simply because they can't pay a small amount of money to get out, even though they don't present a danger to our community. And even though we know that cash bail doesn't keep us safe. And that predominantly affects poor people and African Americans, particularly the biggest, largest group of that recently has been African American women. And the prosecutor has the power in this instance to say, we're not going to ask for cash bail. That is just one great example that I can go down the list of policies that with just prosecutorial discretion and the use of leadership in an office can make our criminal justice system what it should be, which is fair and equal for everybody.
And getting to prosecutorial discretion, this has come up obviously a lot in the field of cannabis, whether we should legalize marijuana. Some people are taking the route, and this is happening across the country, of just simply not prosecuting those crimes. Can you talk about what enables you to do that, and what's your position on that?
That's a great question. I'm happy to expand on that. First of all, my position is that I simply will not prosecute a simple possession of marijuana case. And the reason for that is simple possession of marijuana, we know, is not a public safety risk. Does not hurt the community. But what it does is it puts people who are convicted for that crime, even if they go through a diversion program as they're currently set up right now, it gives them an arrest record that they can never expunge in Virginia. So for the rest of their life, every time they go get an application for an apartment or application for a job or even a school loan, that's going to be on the record and that's going to cap what they can do for the rest of their life. And that's terrible because all that is doing is pushing people into a cycle of decreased opportunity, increased poverty, which leads to more crime. And we also know that the effects on that are predominantly felt in the African American community, right? In Fairfax County, I believe you're 4 times more likely if you're African American to get arrested and prosecuted for marijuana than you are if you're Caucasian, even though studies show that everyone uses it about the same way. So my position is I'm not going to prosecute simple possession of marijuana cases because I don't want to hurt people for the rest of their lives for no good reason. That keeps us less safe, not more safe. And the mechanism that allows us to do this is that prosecutorial discretion. We know that prosecutors, they can decide which cases to take, which cases, how they want to charge those cases, what sentences they want to ask for, et cetera. And they also have within their power to use their resources. And what we should expect from a Commonwealth's attorney who is a real leader is to put our resources in the things that make us more safe. And that's what prosecutorial discretion is all about here, making sure that we are not wasting our resources on these things that not only don't keep us safe, but actually make us less safe. And that's why I'm confident in saying that through prosecutorial discretion, we'll be able to stop the simple possession of marijuana prosecutions.
Thank you. And let me ask you, so let's say you are successful and win. What is your number one priority? I'm not going to say day one, I know things take time to ramp up, but month 1, month 2, what are the things that you'll be working towards to change the system immediately, or that can be changed immediately?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question because real reform is not a one-day thing, right? It is a process, not an event. And I've actually written a 20-page plan. It's on my website, stevetoscano.com, with all the reforms that I think we should make. And they've all been footnoted to show exactly why these are the right reforms and why they keep us safer. But on the very short-term basis, one of the things that I think that we can get at right away are start to build transparency, right? Because right now, our Commonwealth Attorney's Office is a black box. Nobody knows what goes on in that office. Nobody knows what the outcomes are. We want to invite people in right from the get-go, and we can do that day one, to start creating data to show us where our racial or economic disparities are so that we can focus like a laser on rooting those out, making a more fair justice system. A couple other things that we can do very, very quickly are just through policy changes. With 2 things we already talked about. I'll direct my prosecutors to stop asking for cash bail so that we're no longer penalizing poor people simply for being poor, and to stop prosecuting simple possession of marijuana cases so that we are no longer affecting an entire group of people for the rest of their lives. Those are things that we can do day one or very, very quickly. And I'm happy to talk about any of them at length or go into some of the more long-term reforms as however you want to have this chat go.
Sure. The other question I had for you is what would you say, and we know your opponent's not here, what would you say separates you from the people running against you? Now, obviously, you've beaten the current incumbent. What would separate you as a Commonwealth attorney from both the current incumbent and your opponent?
Well, I think there are really two things that separate me from the incumbent that I beat in the primary and the person I'm running against in the general election. And those are values and leadership. The first one, let's talk about values because it's incredibly important. Our criminal justice system is intimately involved with the rest of our community, right? We can only go where we want to go as a community if all parts of us are rowing in the same direction. And that means being led with the same values. And I'm committed to that. I know how important that is. I have the values of our community. I've shown it by being a leader and being involved in our community for years. Quite frankly, the opponent that I'm running against right now, he's only been running his campaign for about 40, 45 days, has no ties to the community, doesn't know really what's going on. I've traveled this community. I know I share its values, and I'm going to lead with those values. And the second thing is leadership. I am not afraid when I see a problem to try to fix it. I know that's what people are electing. They're electing a leader. They're electing a fighter. And my opponent at his kickoff talked about how there doesn't need to be any change to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. There doesn't need to be any change to the criminal justice system. And even at some points, recognized that there were problems with things like cash bail, but said, but we don't need to do anything about it. That's not a leader. That is somebody who is the status quo. I'm going to lead. I'm going to seek out problems, and I'm going to search, and I'm going to find out ways to fix them. And I'll say this, at the end of the day, I know that I work for you. I know that I work for the people, and that you're going to have a fighter in your corner. And if my opponent doesn't even have the backbone to show up today to tell you what he's about, how can you expect him to be a leader in the fight for you every single day when he's your Commonwealth's attorney? He can't. That's who I am, and that's what I'll do.
One of the things the current incumbent and the Board of Supervisors stresses is that our criminal justice here in Fairfax County has a way to defer, to move people out of the criminal justice system, whether they need mental health services or anything else. With that current system, do you see any issues there with it and how it can be improved, and how would you go about it?
There are actually tremendous issues with what we have now. As a matter of fact, it's one of the core tenets of my candidacy is trying to reform our system so that we actually are doing real diversion and trying to keep people out of the criminal justice system to help them get at the root causes of their problems in an effort to keep them out of that cycle of decreased opportunity, increased poverty, and increased crime. It not only helps them with the rest of their life, but it keeps us safer as a community. Right now, what we have is we have these diversion programs. A lot of them are in name only. For example, let's talk about a drug court. When I think of a drug court, what I think about is a diversion that if you are arrested for drug possession, regardless of the drug or a small nonviolent crime meant to feed your drug addiction, you get help. And if you make it through the end of the program, your charge is either reduced or even thrown all the way out so that you can go back to our community with your addiction under control, but also without the type of criminal record that's going to handicap you for the rest of our lives. Now, my opponent would sit here and tell you, well, we have that. But that actually, what we have, it doesn't come in until after you've been arrested, convicted, sentenced, serve your sentence, and it only offers you help if you violate your supervision. It comes in way too late, and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Another great example of this is our Veterans Court. We have I'm a veteran. I'm a West Point graduate, served in the U.S. Army. We have 72,000 veterans in Fairfax County. These are people who have served and because of the service may have PTSD or they self-medicate with drug addiction, with drugs or alcohol or what have you. We have a program right now that can really work to help people get at the root causes of their crime and to help them come back to our community as fully functioning members of our society. But the Commonwealth's attorney is the person who decides whether or not that person gets into a program or not. Right now, we have less than 10 people in that program because our current Commonwealth's attorney refuses to offer anyone an incentive to get into a difficult year-long program. And I've talked to the people who are on the program. They can handle them. They say, Steve, give us all you got. We have the space. We just need a Commonwealth's attorney who sees value in this type of program and who wants to actually make it people get into this program almost as a default and try to help more people as opposed to just locking them away like the status quo.
And I have two more questions before I'll turn it over to the audience, but I had one. Right now, we saw recently that the FCPD suspended an officer for turning over a driver to ICE. What role, if any, does the Commonwealth Attorney play in that, in the decision to cooperate with the federal authorities? And do you see you pursuing a change from your office as it relates to that?
You know, the Commonwealth's attorney has a big role in making that determination, at least for the Commonwealth's attorney's office. Because again, this is a leadership job, right? This job is not to just go push paper, be ministerial. This is to lead and lead our criminal justice system. And I will tell you that it's that my stated policy is that me and my office, we will never cooperate with ICE when it comes to a defendant, a victim, or a witness. And the reason for that is because that makes us less safe. You know, if you have a group of people who, because of their status, are afraid to go to law enforcement if they've been victimized, all that does is create a pocket of people who are sitting victims that other people will come in and victimize. It'll lead to more crime. It'll hurt those families. We can't do that. We have to make sure everybody gets an equal level of justice, that everyone is protected regardless of their immigration status, because that's the only way that A, we're going to live our values, but B, we're going to make our community more safe. And as far as outside of the Commonwealth's attorney's office, because this is a leadership job, this job is to be out in the public and to make these arguments and to try to advocate for the entire community. That's something I'm willing to do, to lead and to advocate and to have those conversations to try to make sure that that view of justice is held not only in the Commonwealth's attorney's office, but everywhere else as well.
Thank you. And this one, I don't know if you've considered it, but it's something that's been on my mind recently. A lot of communities now are preparing to use facial recognition technology for law enforcement. Obviously, that's fraught with issues, and there's a debate going on at the federal level about it. Have you given any thought to, if facial recognition leads to an arrest, whether you would turn that evidence over to a defense attorney under your obligations?
Oh, well, I think your question about facial recognition is showing your background a little bit, your technology background a little bit there, Sean. But it's a great question, and I think the where you went with it in terms of discovery is incredibly important. You know, in case you don't know, in the way the criminal justice system works is, you know, prosecutor has an obligation to turn over certain things to a defense attorney so that they're able to make their case. And right now, Virginia is by far around the country the most restrictive in terms of discovery. A defendant is entitled to almost nothing. They're not entitled to a police report, not entitled to a number of things that you would think that you would need to build your case and make your defense. I come from the federal system where we have more open file discovery, and that's what I want to bring. I want to hand over pretty much everything that the defense has, or assuming that the government has, to the defense attorneys for a number of reasons. First of all, the job of the prosecutor is not to win cases. The job of the prosecutor is to do justice, and that is always going to be my mandate. The second thing is handing over information in a timely fashion means we have fair trials, which we all want a system that is fair and just. And then the third thing is, because the prosecutor's job is not to win cases, it's to do justice, the last thing I ever want to do is put somebody in jail who's innocent. And the easiest, most surefire way to do that is handing over everything to defense attorneys with time, so that if there is a problem, there is an actual ability to say, my guy is innocent. I want to know that before we go to trial, because I'm never going to put somebody in jail that's innocent.
All right. Thank you so much again for engaging in this chat with us. You know, obviously there are a host of issues that we can get into, but I want to give the audience opportunities to do this since we're scheduled to go to about 1 o'clock, about 15 minutes left. Do we want to just pass the mic around based on hands here, and then we'll allow questions? So I see Andy in the front, and then I'll pass it to the back.
Thank you. So my question is sort of two-part. One, I'm sort of ignorant about exactly what power the Commonwealth's attorney has, and maybe it's absolute over the prosecutor's office. But my concern is about institutional inertia, where you have a bunch of prosecutors who've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And, you know, a lot of people, when you're in a job or whatever, we can all understand how it's easy to do things the way you've been doing them before. And so basically the two-part is like, what would you explain the power you'll have as the Commonwealth's attorney, and how you will then wield it to sort of combat this sort of institutional inertia that will no doubt exist, to make sure that the goals that you and I think our community shares about how justice should be performed will actually happen?
Great question, Andy. Well, a great two-part question, actually. The role of the Commonwealth's attorney, as I said, is the most powerful person in the criminal justice system. They are the ones who decide whether to accept or reject a case, whether to divert a case or bring it to the criminal justice system, what charges to bring, what witnesses to call, what sentence to ask for, which plea to offer. Basically, the police bring somebody to the courthouse door. Prosecutor determines if they walk in. The judge picks the final sentence, but it's almost like a buffet. The judge can only pick from the items the prosecutor has put onto the table. So if you are interested in criminal justice reform, if you're interested in changing our criminal justice system, it has to go through the prosecutor. So it is incredibly, incredibly powerful. As to the question about institutional inertia, it's a very, very great question because we have only had 2 Commonwealth's attorneys in Fairfax County since 1957. And the person who I defeated in the primary was the handpicked successor of the guy who had the job for 50 years, and he himself worked in the office for 35 years. So we have a criminal justice system that has not changed as Fairfax County has changed dramatically around it. And there are a number of ways that we're going to get rid of that institutional inertia, and it's through leadership and leading with our values. I mentioned that I had a 20-page plan to bring reform to our system. And what we're going to do is I'm going to implement that plan reform by reform. But I'm also going to take an approach where we actually, instead of what we have right now, where every prosecutor is going off and doing whatever as individuals, we're going to create an office culture that is focused on justice. We're going to create an office culture that's focused on fairness. And we're going to do it by me showing real leadership and bringing policies and procedures and holding people accountable. The other thing that I really, really want to stress this is one of the reasons I'm running is to reform our system and make it more fair for everybody. And criminal justice reform, there's long, there's medium, and there's short term. I want to tell you real quick about one of my plans for long-term reform. And I call it the bench for the bench. Right now, our judiciary, who does play a huge role in our criminal justice system, is not diverse. They, for the most part, look like me. And in a county like Fairfax County, that shouldn't be the case. Part of the reason is that a lot of judges, their background starts or includes time in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. And the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is incredibly non-diverse. What I want to do as a long-term reform, and I've already talked to members of the various minority bars in Fairfax about how to get more candidates and how we can get more people of color with different backgrounds into the office. But I want to bring those people into the office, not just for appearance sakes, but to build bridges with our community, right? So that people our Commonwealth's attorney is more responsive to the community. But I also want to put them in positions of authority and put them on the cutting edge and put them in charge of cutting edge things like the diversion program Sean and I talked about earlier to make them more attractive candidates for future judgeships. Because if any of those people get put onto the bench, that is 30 years of someone who sees the world the way that we do, who came up with our values, who is going to be in charge of our criminal justice system. Those are the types of reforms that I'm talking about. Short, medium, and long term. That's why we need a leader in this position. Somebody who sees not just today and not just tomorrow, but is looking 30 years down the field to make sure that we have a criminal justice system that keeps up with the changing of Fairfax County. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate the question.
So Steve, I really appreciate your devaluing the importance in your department of prosecution for simple marijuana possession. I want to go to the opposite extreme. We just had the terrible example in Front Royal, Virginia, in which the head of the Economic Development Agency, the sheriff, other top officials were caught in a horrific scam to take the money from people. We're watching in Washington right now, Donald Trump being the most criminal, liable, corrupt scheme ever to be had. How do we ensure that your department is going to look at the whitest of white-collar crime with the seriousness that it merits, and by doing such, create a standard that says fairness is at the justice system at the very top, not just at the petty criminal level in our society?
That's a great question. I actually appreciate you asking that because my background as a federal prosecutor is white-collar frauds. I actually, when I was recruited to be a DOJ prosecutor, I had the opportunity to do a number of things, but what I focused on, because it was in my heart, was white-collar criminals. Because I know that there are real victims there, and I know when you talk about white-collar crime, you're talking about the rich and powerful taking advantage of the poor and vulnerable. And that's something that spoke to me. It's something I don't think that we can have anywhere, but especially not in Fairfax County. And your point about white-collar crime is well taken, because right now in Fairfax County, we don't have anybody doing that type of work in this highly educated, rich, diverse, dynamic community with all these Fortune 500 companies, with all that we have. We don't have anybody doing white collar crime in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. I've actually been told by people who work in that office that there is not anybody in that office who even knows how to subpoena financial records from a financial institution if the financial institution is outside of Virginia. Can you imagine that? That's why what we need to do is we need to take our Commonwealth Attorney's Office and our criminal justice system out of Fairfax County from 1956 and bring it up forward to today and ready to face the challenges of tomorrow. That's why one of the things that I want to do is I want to create specialization and create, in particular, a white-collar economic crimes prosecution unit. Because if we're going to continue to meet the challenges of tomorrow, we need to focus on that, because white-collar crime does create victims. And if we're talking about safety in our community, we need to talk about safety for all of our community, and that's part of it.
Hi, Steve. There was an ACLU report, I think it was last year that it was released, that revealed that women are going into Virginia's jails and prisons at a much steeper rate than men in the Commonwealth and also nationwide. I think the pathways to the criminal justice system for women oftentimes starts with trauma, sexual trauma, physical, addiction, poverty, etc. And I also think that the conversation on the specifically vulnerable population of women and girls is often not focused on when we talk about some of the diversion programs that you have mentioned. I want to know, if elected, what are you going to do to handle the specific population and examine the issue, in Fairfax County in a more transparent, better way?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great question, because it touches on so many different things. I will say that I've read that ACLU report, and the first thing that jumped out to my mind was that the largest driver of women, particularly single mothers, being put into jail, into the criminal justice system, is through them not being able to afford cash bail, right? And we know that when we have a single mother who is sitting in jail because they can't afford cash bail, that wreaks havoc with their lives and wreaks havoc with their children's lives and the entire community. So getting rid of cash bail is one thing that is going to help that community or help with that problem. But I think your point is right, that we can't just think that the things that we're doing for other issues will trickle down to this specific group of individuals who are being hurt in a specific way. We can't take a rising tide lifts all boats approach, right? That's why when I talk about changing the way that what we do in the office and changing how we're reaching out to different people and creating more diversion programs, it's so important that we re-examine from top to bottom everything that our office has done. Because I can tell you, in 1956, the last time, basically the start of our criminal justice system, our Commonwealth's attorneys, they weren't thinking about that issue. So what I can promise you is that when I'm elected as Commonwealth Attorney, I'm going to take a top to bottom review of the entire office. And what we're going to do is we're going to create policies and procedures. We're going to look at things of staffing, and we're going to bring in advocates and experts from all around to tell us where we are failing as a criminal justice system. Because I will tell you that, I can try to open the aperture for myself as much as possible. But I know that my background, I am who I am. My lens is as a straight white man, right? I need to bring in people from other areas with different lenses to help us find where things are falling through the cracks. And especially one of the things that I want to focus on are women and people who start in the criminal justice system because of trauma that they themselves have experienced. Because not criminalizing victims and not criminalizing people who have suffered trauma are really one of those things that are going to make our community more safe and our community more strong.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. I'll just close it out. Oh yeah, absolutely. Anyone else?
One of the things that concern me.
Hold the mic closer to your mouth.
Hello?
Yeah, that'll work.
One of the things that concerned me is when he was asking you questions. Actually, there were two things, but I'm going to ask you one. One was about the marijuana use, and the other one was about the police officer in Fairfax County that called ICE on the person that they arrested. Okay, the first one on the marijuana issues. Since 9/11, to have jobs with the government is very difficult because, you have to go to an extensive check, background.
Absolutely.
you say that if a person, if you stop a person because has used marijuana, you would not create a record because it would damage them for life. But let's say in my company, if we hire a person that has not been arrested for committing such an offense, because I believe in Virginia it's illegal to do drugs, marijuana, I believe. So if you do not create a record for this person, what do we do as a company hiring a person that used drugs, but because you didn't want to charge them, we're not aware that this person has that habit and can actually bring consequences to the type of work that we do?
Well, I appreciate that question, but I think what we have to recognize is that using marijuana is simply not a public safety risk, right? And the job of the Commonwealth's attorney, first and foremost, is the safety of the community. And it is not to criminalize people who have done something that is not a public safety risk. And, so with that perspective, it's incredibly important to not create criminal records for people who have done nothing that hasn't made our community more dangerous. And not only that, because we're concerned about public safety, we need to look down that field. And when we have somebody who has a record that can never get expunged, when they can't get an education, when they can't get a job, when they can't get an apartment, that actually is going to hurt their quality of life, hurt their family's quality of life, and actually make our community less safe because they're going to be pushed into a cycle where they might be pushed to crime or they might be pushed to the fringes of society. When we are talking about building strong communities, what we are talking about is giving everybody the opportunity to live life to the fullest extent and to keep our community safe. Not prosecuting simple possession of marijuana cases is one very simple way to do that. That's why I'm prepared to do it, because it's the right thing to do, it aligns with our values, and it keeps our community safe.
But then why is not the marijuana, why is it illegal then? Why don't they make it legal? Because if it is illegal, and let's say if somebody's driving that has marijuana in their system, and they crash against me, because they don't have a record that they use marijuana, I don't find that is. See, that's the difference. I'm talking about simple possession of marijuana, right? And that is the attack I hear every time I talk about this very common sense reform. Oh, no, it's not an attack.
It's what about if somebody is driving? Well, if someone is driving impaired for marijuana, it is a different crime. It is driving while impaired. And that is something that we're going to prosecute because that does create a public safety hazard. That does create a public safety risk. There is nuance to the criminal justice system. And that's why these elections and these types of forums are incredibly important, because you can't get to the right answer with a 10-second soundbite. There's a lot of nuance here. And that's the nuance on the marijuana issue. At the end of the day, if someone is creating a public safety risk, they are going to be dealt with accordingly. But simple possession of marijuana does not create that public safety risk. All that does, prosecuting those crimes, all that does is hurt people and hurt communities, and that's why I won't do it. You can trust me to be able to take that nuanced approach, and taking that nuanced approach means we will not ever prosecute a simple possession of marijuana case. Thank you for your questions.
Hi, Steve. Everything you said, I'd like to say thank you for. Sounds very promising. I'm just curious to know, what is your role with child support enforcement and the impact that it has when it relates to arresting those generally fathers that end up getting arrested, and that arrest tends to impact their ability to maintain their jobs, and if they don't have the money to get out of jail, that even increases their inability to maintain their jobs?
I think that's a great question. And as far as arrests go, the Commonwealth's attorney's position deals with obviously prosecution and after arrest. But I will tell you as a general matter, we've talked about it across a number of things, is that we are never going to criminalize poor people simply because they can't pay, right? Criminalizing poor people simply because they're poor, all that does, it doesn't make them more wealthy. All it does is it creates stress for them and their families, and it takes them out of the job that they might have and pushes them even further down the socioeconomic ladder, and pushes them into a cycle of decreased opportunity because of increased poverty and then leading to increased crime. In my office, regardless of the question that is asked, the answer is always going to be, we are not going to penalize people simply for being poor, and we're going to do everything we can to put somebody in a position that they can go out and support their family and meet their obligations, because that is how we create safe and strong communities. Thank you for your question.
What would be your, what would be your role in trying to reduce recidivism rate for people that in and out of jail where they can actually become employed and become a great person in society?
Thank you for that question. A lot of the things that we're talking about is trying to break that recidivism, that cycle of recidivism. That's why we're doing things like not asking for cash bail, right? Because when we ask for cash bail, even if someone is in jail for a few days, the recidivism rate, even years down the line, skyrockets. But that's why we're not going to prosecute things like simple possession of marijuana, because once you have that type of record, your recidivism rate skyrockets. That's why we're going to try to get people in diversion programs instead of the criminal justice system to address the root causes so that they can get out of that recidivism cycle. You know, almost every single thing that I want to do here comes back to the idea that our communities will be more safe if we break recidivism cycle. So almost every single thing that I'm doing, that I'm trying to focus on, is to reduce recidivism. And it's not going to happen when somebody is in jail. It's going to happen before they get to that point. That's what we need to think about. That's why this role is so important, because we need a leader who is going to think down the field that way and is going to be thinking about the consequences of an action the second a case comes across our desk in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Steve. That's our time for questions. I just want to thank you again